So I have a question here that talks about the climate we're in right now. Do you see it getting worse before it gets better? Where do you see things going right now, both in COVID times, politics, the world in general, which seems like it's a little bit in disarray, flux, and a little craziness going on right now?
Yeah. So people have to remember that politics, political media, all of that thrives on division, right? It thrives on division. That's what it lives on. I mean, if you look at, cable news media, Democrat, Republican, split screen, fight, that's what it is. I worked at The View. It's a lot of people, they like there's a lot of division, and arguing really builds media in many ways. And that is what you see then trickle out. Now you have social media, which is basically people screaming at each other all day long. So division is a business model for many places. And that business model penetrates out into society. And then we become what they're becoming because we watch it all day and we're like, oh, this is the new normal. So it really creates a lot of societal angst, division. Your next door neighbor somehow becomes your enemy. It just wasn't quite like this before the influx of social media, before the influx of, kind of a collusion, I call. You have big tech and you have big media and you have big Hollywood and you have big pharma. There's all these bigs that are running everyone's life. My last book touched on how big tech essentially puppeteers us and studies behavioral science in order to figure out how to program us essentially into little robots that, tweet and whatnot. People should check that book out too. It was fun. Plus I write some fun stories about an ex-boyfriend that you'll enjoy. Regardless. But yeah, I think that the tide is turning in the sense that when you look at, something like the mandates, now it's involving kids, eyes are open a little bit more than they ever have been. I think that people are leaving. I mean, I've seen a lot of people leave corporate media and go and do their own thing in this podcast because they want to have these conversations. I think there is a greater thirst now for people who actually tell you what they think, and that is growing. I think the thirst for freedom is growing. And I mean, I operate in New York City right now. That is not representative of the country. You go to other places and you're like, wow, this is like another planet. Mm-hmm. So people should do that, should pick up if they're, stuck in these places where, you can't eat a sandwich in a restaurant in New York City without showing a card. Preposterous, ridiculous intrusion of privacy on top of everything else. But that doesn't exist in a lot of places. So I think a lot is going to change. I think there's going to be big changes with the midterm elections. I think the next presidential election is going to be fascinating to watch unfold, but I do think it's going to get better. I think that there's going to be a little bit of a battle with the CDC. The CDC is hanging tight on this, natural immunity doesn't exist. They're putting out studies that are junk science. I mean, right. Really, it's just factually junk science. You look at it, it doesn't make any sense. And this is not just me saying it. These are, I talk to vaccinated traditional medicine doctors that are horrified. Mm-hmm. In fact, my medical exemption letter was written by a vaccinated infectious disease specialist in New York City. He's not anti-vaccine, he's vaxxed, but he was like, this is not for you. Mm-hmm. So he's also sane. So I do think there's going to be a change, but I think it's going to take a while. And I think it's going to take more people realizing, because there's a lot of people that went through with these mandates, but now it's affecting their kids. And they're like, oh, wait a minute, hold on a second. So again, like what we were saying before, what is your line? Is your line your own health? Is your line your kids' health? Is your line your neighbor who suddenly you notice has a pre-existing medical condition and suddenly, wait a minute, why are they being discriminated against? This doesn't seem right. What is it? What is that line? Is your line just living in a place where now it reads like a bad dystopian novel where people have to show cards to get in everywhere? And that's not an energy you want for your kids. Do you want your 6-year-old to have to show a vaccine card to get into, an activity after school? Is that, so it's going to take some time. And it may be that these areas that like this stuff, like the Los Angeleses and New York, dig in deeper on that. And the people who don't like it leave and go to places where they say, I don't want this kind of life. And that maybe that division does grow a little bit in terms of geographic differences that happen around the country in terms of the belief systems and what's going on. I mean, look at Florida and California, they couldn't be more different. So, I think the hope is really in the people who are thinking people, just thinking, not worried about what everyone else is doing. And I always say, I gravitate toward people who aren't interested in telling someone else what to do. those are people that interest me. I don't care what they do with their own life. Truthfully, I really don't, unless they come to me and they say, do you think, and they're asking my advice. It's not my business what they're doing, but it is my business that they care enough about my freedom, because if they care about my freedom, they care about everyone else's. And that's somebody that I want as my neighbor, because they're going to fight for that freedom, and my right to disagree with them or live a different life from them. So it will get better, but it's going to take time, and it's going to take resistance to these things and questions, and people are going to have to, there's going to be struggle involved. I could have a much bigger salary right now. I don't right today because of these things, but it's okay. I'm doing what feels right for me. And it's going to take a little bit of sweat,